I am a 29-year-old woman living in the United States. This experience began months ago with a family I work for. I never believed in strange occurrences until this happened while I was babysitting. I currently take care of 3 children, a 10-year-old girl, an 8-year-old boy, and the youngest, who is 4. I've been taking care of them since the youngest was a baby, and I've never had any serious issues with them, just the usual child tantrums. I love them as if they were my own children. One day their mother called me to watch over them for a few days, while she and her husband went on a trip. The first few nights were fine, nothing out of the ordinary, but on the 4th night everything changed. We were watching cartoons when it was time for bed. The youngest one was always the hardest to put to sleep because she had so much energy. All 3 children shared a room because the 8-year-old's room was under repair. After finally getting the youngest to sleep, I went downstairs to watch my favorite show. A few minutes later, I heard the alphabet toy belonging to the little one. It was a toy with buttons that played letters and sounds to help kids learn. I thought she must have gotten out of bed and was playing with it. Annoyed, I got up from the couch and went upstairs. I opened the door to her room and found all 3 children sound asleep. There were no toys on the floor, so I checked the closet where we kept the toys, but I couldn't find it. I was confused because I had clearly heard the toy upstairs. Just then I heard it again, but this time from downstairs. The toy has a button that says, "ABC, come sing with me," followed by a small laugh. That's exactly what I heard. My stomach dropped and I froze in fear because I knew for sure the little one hadn't brought the toy downstairs. I quietly went down and found the toy on the dining table. I was shocked again because it wasn't there before. I approached it, and when I touched it, I noticed it was turned off, but it started saying, "ABC, come sing with me." I immediately removed the batteries. At that moment, the 10-year-old called my name from the top of the stairs and asked what was going on. Not wanting to scare her, I told her it was nothing and that she should go back to bed. I wasn't sure what to make of it. I put the batteries in a kitchen drawer and went to check on the kids. The 10-year-old was sitting on her bed, and when she saw me, she asked if everything was okay. I sat beside her and said everything was fine. "Liar," she said. "You're scared." I was taken aback, so I replied, "No, I just had a bad dream, that's all." She slowly shook her head. "No, it's not true. Sebastian scared you." I asked her who Sebastian was, but she just lay down, facing the wall. "Don't let him scare you," she said. "He just wants to play with the little one's toy." I was very confused and scared, and I didn't want to ask her any more questions. I couldn't sleep that night, and I realized the 10-year-old had also heard the toy. She was apparently used to it. The next night, I managed to sleep a bit because nothing unusual happened until the early hours of the morning. I heard whispers outside my door. It was still dark, and I rubbed my eyes to figure out where the sounds were coming from. They came from the children's room, which was across from mine. I slowly opened the door and saw the 10-year-old sitting on the carpet. She looked at me surprised. "What are you doing awake?" I asked. She simply answered, "Nothing." I told her to go back to bed since it was too early for her to be up. "Who are you talking to?" I asked. She just stared at me blankly. "I heard you talking," I said. She replied with a serious expression. "Sebastian is upset because you're not paying attention to him. He wants you to take care of him too." A chill ran down my spine. I told her to go back to bed and that we'd talk about it later. But she interrupted me saying, "No, Sebastian wants your attention now," her voice rising slightly and now sounding a bit annoyed. At that moment, the other 2 children woke up. The 8-year-old boy grumbled at his sister, telling her that Sebastian needed to leave me alone. I asked if they also knew about Sebastian, and they nodded. Fortunately, the parents were returning that same day, and I couldn't wait to leave. Later, the 10-year-old refused to eat the meal I made for her, unlike her siblings, who had no issue and were playing outside. I scolded her for not touching her food for so long, and by this point I was getting frustrated. But then she looked at me, annoyed, and asked, "Where's Sebastian's food?" I decided to play along and asked her where Sebastian was now. She laughed and said, "He's holding my leg." I felt a chill run down my legs as she said that, but I tried to stay calm and not show fear. "Well, Sebastian, if you don't sit down, I won't serve you food." The 10-year-old smiled as she looked toward where I was standing. By this point, I really hoped her parents would arrive soon. Half an hour later, her parents returned. After unpacking their things and greeting us, the mother looked at the plate of food and smiled, asking why it was there. The kids were already outside playing with their dad. I lowered my voice and told her about the children mentioning a boy here who was trying to get my attention. Her eyes widened and she simply said, "Sebastian?" I asked her, trembling, "Please tell me this is true." She sat me down on the couch and asked me to explain everything that had happened. When I told her about the toy, she remembered that this happened every night, but they had gotten used to it over the years, and she didn't know how they managed it. She explained that the family that had lived there before had a son who died in the house. A few weeks after the tragedy, they decided to move out. Soon after, her family moved in, when the 10-year-old was a baby, and when she started walking and talking, her mother noticed that she would talk to herself and seem to be playing with someone. She would say Sebastian was sad and always wanted to play, especially at night. Her mother thought it was just an imaginary friend, but over time it became clear that it seemed real, like someone was there. She remembered hearing her argue with literally no one and one of her toys disappearing, only to reappear later in the locked shed in the yard. It was impossible for her to have put it there. This scared the parents, so they decided to investigate the history of the house. They found out about the young boy who had passed away, though they didn't have many details. This left them disturbed, but in the end, they decided they would have to deal with it since the boy wasn't hurting anyone. It was also clear that only the 10-year-old could communicate with Sebastian, while the other two children could not. They grew up knowing that he was their older sister's friend. When they noticed her staying up late playing and talking, they would simply tell her to stop and tell Sebastian it was bedtime. Her mother had told me that she had already mentioned Sebastian to me when I first started babysitting them, but that she didn't want to tell me because it might scare me or I wouldn't believe her. But now I saw that Sebastian desperately wanted my attention. It would make us really sad to see you go and not be with our family anymore. But if that's what you decide, we understand, she said with complete calmness. Of course, this came as a surprise. In all the years I had taken care of these children, I had never experienced anything like this before. Maybe Sebastian really just wanted attention after all this time. I couldn't leave them, though. I truly considered them mine. So I decided to continue taking care of them. Nothing unusual happened, except for the occasional things changing places or appearing out of nowhere, like that first time. Little by little, I got used to it, but it's never easy. I never believed in strange things, but sometimes you have to experience it for yourself to change your mind completely. My name is Beatrice, and I've been a babysitter since I was 16. Most of the families I work for lead a pretty peaceful life, with children who love to play, laugh, and run around the house. However, an experience I had on a rainy night completely changed the way I view what is real and what lies beyond our understanding. I never believed in supernatural stories, but what happened that night made me question everything. It was a regular job. The family I worked for lived in a large old house on the outskirts of the city. The house had a classic style, with dark wooden floors and heavy furniture, and it was located on a dead-end street, surrounded by trees that seemed to block out the sunlight. I looked after two children, Anna, 7 years old, and Pedro, 5. They were adorable, but there was always something strange about the house, something I couldn't quite define. One time, the children's mother asked me to stay for the night because she and her husband had a work event. She gave me instructions about the children's routine, handed me dinner for them, and told me to get Anna and Pedro into bed by 8 p.m. Everything seemed normal until the atmosphere in the house started to change. It was a rainy night, and the house was surrounded by an unusual silence. The children were watching a cartoon in the living room, but soon Pedro started complaining that he was tired. Anna, the older one, seemed restless, but I thought it was just the boredom of a rainy night. I asked the two of them to go to their room and get ready for bed. Anna protested, saying she wanted to play a little longer, but I insisted. After some time, I managed to convince Anna to lie down, but Pedro was still restless. I was in my 20s by then, and up until that moment I thought I knew how to handle any situation involving children. But Pedro's behavior started making me feel uneasy. He was lying in bed, but he kept looking at the corner of the room with a fixed, unsettling stare. I asked him what was going on, but he only whispered, "She's there." "Who's there, Pedro?" I asked, trying to stay calm. He didn't answer. He just kept staring at the corner, as if something invisible was drawing him in. I felt strange, but I didn't want to make him more anxious, so I lay down next to him to try and comfort him. He turned to me and in a soft voice said, "She's telling me I can't sleep." I smiled, trying to give him a logical explanation. "Pedro, it's just your imagination. There's no one here but us." But when I looked at the corner where he was pointing, my stomach turned. Something about the atmosphere in the room felt heavy, as if the air was thicker than normal. The silence in the house grew deeper, and a cold sensation took over me. Suddenly, a loud knock on the bedroom door startled me. The knock was rapid and constant, as if someone was banging with their palm. but with a force that didn't make sense for such a quiet house. Pedro looked at the door, his eyes wide open, and whispered, "She's waiting for you." My heart raced. Not knowing what to do, I stood up and went to the door. When I opened it, there was no one there. Just the dark hallway in front of me. I was alone on the upper floor of the house. There was no logical explanation for the sound, but I still couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I tried to go back to the children's room, but something stopped me. A wave of coldness overtook me, and I felt like I was being watched. When I entered the room again, Pedro was now sitting up, his eyes still fixed on the same corner. He didn't say a word, but his expression was pure terror. Anna, who had been quiet in her bed, began speaking in a low, monotone voice. "She said we can't leave. She's going to take us away." I looked at Anna, trying to understand what she was saying, but I couldn't comprehend it. The words were coming out of her with an unsettling calm, as if she were in a trance. Scared, I grabbed my phone and called the children's mother. "Hi, sorry to bother you, but something strange is happening here. I don't know how to explain it, but the kids are different. I need you to come back." On the other side of the line, I heard her voice with an unnerving calmness which gave me chills. "You need to finish what you started, Beatrice. They need you." Confused and terrified, I hung up. At that moment, Anna slowly began to get up from the bed, and Pedro followed her, both walking toward the dark hallway. I tried to stop them, but they kept walking as if being guided by something invisible. The instant they were about to step out the door, an inexplicable force made me shout, "Go back to bed now!" The children stopped immediately. Pedro looked at me with a strange smile, as if he knew something I didn't. "She won't let us go," he said in a cold voice. That's when the coldness in the room intensified and the bedroom door slammed shut by itself, causing the children to flinch in fear. Before I could react, the hallway light flickered several times and a shadow passed quickly by the door. Desperate, I ran out of the room, locking the door behind me. I knew something was wrong. Something sinister had taken over that house. The children were silent, and I could hear them calling my name with distorted voices. "Beatrice" was all that could be heard, but it wasn't their voices. I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. The fear took over me entirely. Somehow the children had been possessed, or at least it seemed that way. The phone rang again, and before I could answer, I heard the mother's voice saying, "You need to leave. They're not the same children anymore." I ran to the living room, where I found the children standing, staring out the window with empty eyes. I knew there was no time left. I grabbed my bag and ran out, not looking back. When I turned for one last glance at the house, the light in the children's room went out suddenly, as if something had been watching me until the last moment. To this day, I can't explain what happened in that house. The children were normal when their parents came back, and they didn't remember anything. I never went back there, and I avoid talking about it. But looking back, I know that night wasn't just a nightmare or a hallucination. Something was there in those shadows waiting, something I may never fully understand. My name is Ileana. To give you some context, on the night of that experience, I was babysitting my 3 younger sisters. I rarely see them since I didn't have a good relationship with my father, which led me to live with my mother. My father always made excuses for why I should visit him, or would say things to manipulate me. Although this story isn't about him, he was very abusive to me during my childhood, and also to my mother when they were together. I love my sisters dearly, but I know they are safe at my father's house. I was the oldest sister, and I think that's why I was treated the way I was. This incident happened a year ago when my father was living in a large, beautiful house. The layout of the house was confusing, but I'll try to explain it the best I can. 2 of my older sister's rooms were in the basement, although it wasn't really a basement. It was the area where the garage was located, along with the back doors leading to the pool and the garden. Essentially, when you went downstairs, you could see the downstairs living room, and beyond that there were my sisters' rooms. Just before their rooms, there was a guest room that had a closet, a storage area, and its own bathroom. It was very open because there was supposed to be a barn-style door, but there was only a frame with no door. Upstairs, there were 2 doors. One led to the kitchen, and the other to the smallest sister's room. At that time, she was around 5 years old, while the other 2 were 10. It was nighttime, and we were all relaxing, which meant that it was completely dark outside. We lived in the woods, so there were animals roaming around. I didn't feel like going to search for a bench to sit them on, so I told them I'd do it later, and sat back down on the couch to continue watching TV. The girls were playing school or something like that. I didn't join in because the youngest one prefers the older ones over me, which hurts a little, but I understand. It was already past her bedtime, but I let her stay up a little longer to hang out. I knew she'd be upset if we had fun without her. I had planned for the older girls and me to watch a movie after the youngest went to bed, so I asked the older girls to take the youngest upstairs while I cleaned up the mess. The three of them ran up the stairs and into the youngest's room, slamming the door behind them. From downstairs I could hear her laughing loudly, and I didn't want her to stay awake too long. So I yelled from the basement, asking the older girls to get her into her pajamas while I searched for a bench in the guest room. All the laughter stopped, and I assumed they were helping their sister get ready for bed. I put the bench by the window and grabbed the curtain to put it back in place when suddenly I heard footsteps coming down the stairs. I didn't hear the youngest's door or the kitchen door open or close. I didn't turn around, assuming it was one of the girls. In the reflection of the glass, I saw the top of someone's head behind the couch. I turned around, confused as to why they'd be behind the couch unless they were planning to scare me. I stayed on the bench while watching someone walk toward the guest room. The person seemed to be about the height of my youngest sister, so I thought it must be her. I got off the bench and went into the guest room, planning to scare who I assumed was my sister. But when I entered the guest room, I looked around and didn't see anyone. I looked under the desk, around the bed, but there was nothing. I thought about whether she might have hidden in one of the 3 doors in the room, but all those doors were very creaky and were all closed. Honestly, I was scared. So even though the girl would get scared being left alone downstairs, I decided to skip checking behind those doors. I turned around and ran up the stairs. I entered the youngest's room and did a quick head count. All 3 of them were there. I don't know what I had just seen or who had passed by behind me, but I was shaking. I've had panic attacks for a long time and need medication to prevent them. A few tears could turn into a full-blown panic attack. I didn't want to scare my sisters, so I simply asked if anyone had been downstairs, and they all denied it. I was shaken, but hid it as best as I could. Eventually, the youngest fell asleep, and the older girls and I went downstairs to watch a movie. I just wanted to relax and try to convince myself that it had just been a reflection or my imagination. Time passed and it got very late. The girls were asleep on the couch and I stayed awake. Suddenly, something made me feel like I had to look at the reflection in the glass doors. The curtains had stayed open. I looked out the window and to my surprise I saw that small figure or thing again. Now it was standing in front of the back door. It's embarrassing to admit because I'm very interested in the paranormal, but I quickly hid under my blanket and began to cry silently until I fell asleep, forcing myself to look all over the house. I wasn't sure what I was looking for, just something to explain what the hell I had seen the night before. Once the girls woke up, I acted as if nothing had happened. I ended up telling the 2 older girls privately, not wanting the youngest to hear. They probably thought I was crazy, which I understand. Even I thought I might be crazy for seeing things that weren't there, but now I don't know what to think. Eventually my parents came home and I told them, but they also thought I was making everything up. Sometime later, my father and my sisters moved away, and I never got an explanation for what happened that night. I still don't know if what I saw was just my imagination or if something was actually there with us, watching us from the darkness of the woods. My name is Felipe and I'm over 50 years old. However, whenever I think back to that night, I feel like I'm 16 again. My friend Juan and I were looking for ways to make some extra money, and we thought babysitting neighborhood kids would be an easy way to do so. We placed an ad in the local newspaper, and before long, we started receiving calls. We quickly became popular, and work started pouring in from all over. Our only condition was that we had to be together for every job, unless there was a particularly troublesome child. It was fun and we were making good money. One night, a woman called us in a panic, asking if we could look after her son. She offered to pay us double, so we agreed. Juan had a driver's license, so he drove while I packed some things. We gathered our food and headed to the house. The drive took longer than expected, and when we arrived, we found a note on the door saying it was unlocked. We thought it was strange that the mother would leave the door unlatched, but we didn't think much of it. We entered and immediately noticed a strange smell, a mix of dampness and cleaning products. The house was old, with wooden floors that creaked with every step. We called out for the child, but there was no answer. We searched the kitchen, the upstairs rooms, the bathroom, and the laundry room. We even checked the bedrooms, thinking maybe he was already in bed, but we couldn't find him. By now, we were starting to get nervous. There were no toys or clothes for a child anywhere to be seen. We were heading downstairs to call the mother when we noticed a door slightly ajar that we hadn't seen before. My friend and I walked toward it, and he slowly pushed it open. That's when we saw it. A life-size doll sitting on a child's bed staring back at us. We were frozen in place, unsure of what to do next. Just then the phone in the kitchen rang. We rushed to answer it. I picked up the receiver, and on the other end was the mother. She asked me to prepare the child for bed and make sure he was in bed by a certain time. She then told me that his pajamas were on his bed, where he was sitting. My stomach twisted. "You mean the doll?" I asked. And she hung up immediately. Juan looked at me asking what she had said. I just stared at him and said, "I think this woman thinks that doll is her son." Juan laughed at first, but then he realized I was serious. He asked if I wanted to leave, and I immediately replied, "We're getting out of this house." We ran out, but when we got to the porch, Juan tapped my shoulder asking, "What's that?" and pointed to the ground. We walked over to take a closer look, and between the neatly trimmed grass there was a gravestone. It read, "Here rests little Andres, 1972-1979. Over the years I've tried to rationalize what happened that night. Maybe the woman had some sort of trauma or mental illness that made her believe the doll was her child, or perhaps it was some kind of macabre joke. But what still bothers me, even after all this time, is the strange connection between the doll and the gravestone. We never babysat again after that disturbing experience. In fact, when I remember that night, I can still feel the chill running down my spine when I saw the gravestone. Juan and I are still friends to this day, but we rarely talk about that incident. When we do, we always end up with the same question: what did we really experience that night? A desperate, disturbed mother, or something much darker? And those were today's stories. Did you like any of them? Comment on which one you liked and tell us if you've ever experienced something like this in your life. Don't forget to like, and I hope to see you in the next video, if you have the courage to watch more stories.